Now we're live.
Beautiful. All right, so welcome back, everybody who may be watching this, or welcome to those of you who are watching in the future. This is Dungeon Master Storytime Session 3. As you may notice, there is not just three of us, but there is a fourth person today. So we would like to welcome Evedalion to our show. Today we've got a couple of interesting topics to discuss. First of all, we're going to be discussing world building, as well as player and DM interactions, and we will get into that later. So for now, Evadillion, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience?
Hello, everyone. Evedalion here. Um, Registered DM. I've been DMing for about 10 years, roughly. I started off in Pathfinder and have branched my eye out to 5e, Starfinder, and various other systems as well. I pretty much enjoy mostly every aspect of D&D, whether it's being a player, being a DM, and I'm here to just talk about my experiences and to share what I've learned throughout the years of me DMing.
Bravo, bravo. That right there is my benefactor, the one that got me on into this, as I am your all friendly benefactor here, as always, ready to have a good conversation.
And I'm Crusader Jackaran. Thank you for being here with us, people. And thank you, Eve, for joining us. I had the pleasure of playing with you in only 2 games, but the second game was really cut short because your scheduling conflict completely blew that one up so that we couldn't actually have a long-term game. It would have been great. Our characters would have been antagonists to each other, but we also would have been like the best of bros from a combat standpoint. Because I was I want to say I was tank and you were melee range DPS, if such a thing exists, because I think you were going to go Sentinel build along with you were using a lance.
Yes.
But in the other game where I was DM, you were a cleric who was an absolute badass. So, yeah, I look forward to playing a game with you again in the future at some point. Just don't know when that's going to be.
Scheduling, it's a very common thing that DMs have to deal with, and sometimes it works in our favors, another time it doesn't.
Yep.
They say scheduling is what kills a game, but go ahead, Crusader.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So we're gonna talk about world building. This is a great topic. I like this topic. Like when I was looking over my notes, I was like, could talk about things like damage. Could talk about things like HP modifications and balancing out and what's like the right encounter to throw against people. When do you start going into advanced encounters? And it's like we're still not done talking about story elements. And I'm happy about that. I love talking story elements. I was also thinking about nerding out about some Star Wars stuff, possibly nerding out about some DC comics or X-Men stuff. And it's like, oh no, we can go into world building. I like world building. So, Benefactor, do you want to run us through this list here that you have?
We don't have to say it like that, but we'll start off here a little bit of world building. I was thinking about asking, which is courtesy of Eve here. This is really mostly his. I just fleshed it out a little bit more clear and concisely. But how do everyone here go about creating and building a world in its various locations within it? To me, when I build a world, I want it to be a world that the players themselves can really feel a part of. It's the same when I make a sort of campaign. It's something that the players have a heavy influence on even before I do anything else. You know what I mean? Their backstory usually always just tightens right in. So when I go about building and creating the world, this just kind of leads to another point. I incorporate the players' backstories into them and make the world reflect around that. Even if I have what you can say a story, it's still a story revolving around whatever the characters made their backstory of. So for me, it's going about and building those places and locations, those people that they have in their lives and that they want to meet, or people of interest that has a relation to them. And if I do want to have something in the world, we'll say like a story, I will usually make it that it's always character player driven. The story is never some grand Neo's thing or anything like that. It's always this is what the players want. This is the players will go about, and they will have ways to achieve it within the world that I made, in the world that we made. I would like to take the best example of that is Miss Lady Potato. I mentioned this in the previous previous live chat that she wrote a backstory for my Scion campaign that I really loved and was able to nicely incorporate, because it was dealing with her father and her father mysterious disappearance, things like that. So I was like took the stuff she had about her father, the Mirror Man, and made something where for her, her goal is to, find out more about her father. So I intertwined with what I did have for the world. You can say quote the story with the cult, that would get involved with them. I had her father be involved with said cult. She found a memoir, a book of stuff about what he did with them. And my whole big thing with her was to find out what was true and what was false from what she knows of her father, what this book says of her father, and what those in the cult say of her father. And for me, that's a key thing when building and creating a world for your players. Make sure that it is a world of and for and by your players. You can't just be the only one involved. They have to feel like they actually have some influence on what's going on within your core world.
Yeah, I have to say everything that you said there is pretty accurate and true, and I think that that's excellent advice. But just to back up a little bit there, we sort of mentioned or discussed the possibility of like how you go about creating the various locations in your world. And when I sat and thought about that, well, I kind of categorize things into, I guess, a couple sort of categories. The first one being um, for the various locations in your world is you have to decide a couple things first. First and foremost, you sort of have to decide, okay, what kind of world is this going to be? A great way I do this is by deciding on sort of like perhaps stereotypes, like let's say something like grimdark or a Wild West setting, and I'll use those elements to help enforce certain aspects of my world. For example, if I'm going the Wild West route, there's going to be gangs of cowboys around. There's going to be deserts, possibly those sort of things. Those, and then you take those influences as well, and you can use those to name places as well as decide what kind of settlements might be nearby or work camps or things of that nature. I'm sorry to take a step back from what you were just saying, but I thought that was also important to note on this topic, especially when we talk about incorporating player backstories into them, because oftentimes these players were, involved in these sort of organizations, and you take them and implement them into your world however fits best.
No, I said there was no interruption there, and let's say I did kind of glance over the various locations part, and you're right. That's on me there. When I made locations for my players within the games I'm running, usually I have an idea behind them and what do these locations mean when they go there. What is behind these locations? What's the history behind these locations? So he said sometimes it can be based on the campaign scenario, sometimes it can be based on the players. And sometimes it could be, what, I want to throw a random village of cannibals here. Sometimes you just want to have that one place that is just darker than maybe the rest of your campaign. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't want people thinking that all your locations need to fit this preset path because you're running a sci-fi campaign or a old western campaign. Sometimes it's good to be free. You never know. There's always some wacky things out there. But how about you? Go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, it's sometimes good to use the, for example, the Wild West mold and then break it too. So you might have like a necromancer in the Wild West, and that's your main villain, for example. But it's interesting to point out the things that you want to keep from, the stereotypes and the things that you want to change. But go ahead.
But no, I was gonna ask our guest here, give him a chance to really shine since he's a long-term DM.
Well, for me, world building is one of the more complicated aspects of being a DM. The thing is, as I always tell other people, especially new DMs, it's only as complicated as you want it to be. You don't always have to put in an exorbitant amount of effort in order to get something that you generally like. And how much energy you put into something is solely up to you. Don't try to burn yourself out trying to make, a token level of experience type story for your players if just that's not something that you're capable of doing. Not every one of us are professional story writers who can make uh certain things. So what I tend to do for myself is to break things down into small little categories to help myself organize on different events that I will have in place in the overall building process. So first off, I particularly start off with what type of general story am I going to be trying to make, and I follow that by what setting. So like they mentioned, like a western setting or a sci-fi setting, or a medieval setting, something baseline to start off as a foundation. After I decide that, then I choose to how am I going to expand on that central idea. Is it going to be like a war campaign where there's going to be political intrigue? Is it going to be more of a freelance campaign where the adventurers could travel about and do whatever they want to do? Once I decide that, that kind of dictates how I shape the events. Because, for example, in a political intrigue campaign, I would have to create political parties. I would have to create families. I would have to create alliances, enemies, backstabs, and betrayals to fit this political intrigue type story. While a freelance story has more room for creativity where I can just throw random things that don't necessarily have a cohesive tie in, but I can add tie in if need be later on, as well as incorporate various different elements that I want to make a better overall informed experience. After that, I tend to see what the players want from the campaign in general, because not everyone wants a particular type of campaign. So I try to make my campaigns in what how can I say this? In the gears of what my player group likes to play. Because even if I create something that I think they might like, they might not actually like it. So getting their informed opinion on what type of games they generally enjoy, whether it's more story driven, more action related, will help me then set the pace so that I can fulfill the needs of multiple players in the party. Because this is a cooperative experience. You want everyone to have some level of enjoyment or fun, and every player has their own type of what they get their fun from. Some people might get it more from story, some people might get it more from combat. And then once that particularly is finished, then I put my own personal twist on it, which is creating story beats that connect the overarching story. And once that's done, everything else falls into place.
I think that sounds very solid, like a really great foundation to use to build your campaigns. Would you say that that is the basis that all you basically need to get a campaign up and running?
For a beginner standpoint, yes, because there's different sorts of nuances that you can add, which you guys talked about, homebrew editions and various other things you can add to enhance the experience. But just from a bare bones perspective, when you're just trying to get like a general idea of what type of story that you're trying to tell, that's the technique that I use just to get a nice foundation.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds like pretty solid advice. Start with what your theme is as a DM. You start with the theme. This is the setting. And I did this with the DC Vertigo game that we ran. I basically said, here's the environment, here's the setting that we're taking place in, and here's the world. And then from there, you get to see, as we've talked about before, players have their lens. They have their agenda, their things that they want to do. And sometimes the player gets really fixated on it and they follow the rabbit, where other players are kind of like not knowing what they want, and they sometimes do know what they want. It's a different type of player where they get scatterbrained, or if they're hyper focused on the thing. Benefactor here gets, I don't want to say hyper focused, but he stays in the realm of what he has in mind for his characters. Some of our other friends, they actually are scatterbrained and they're all over the place. And some of them, their take is they like to have an idea, but they intentionally leave themselves open to new ideas and experiences. They're looking at it as, well, if I close my character concept off, I can't grow in ways that I can't foresee. So they're kind of looking at it from the meta of, I don't know what's going to happen. I might see a story hook that's really interesting to my character, and I want to try and include that in my character. And if I close that avenue off, I can't. So what he was saying is DM is very good at setting the theme, the tone, the atmosphere. Then you let the players start interacting with the world, build it, and carve out how this labyrinth looks and how this labyrinth shapes up for everyone. That's a fascinating way of looking at it. And I'd say it's a pretty good way of articulating the DM and player symbiotic relationship.
I guess now, as far as places that you actually need to create in your setting to get your campaign started, I would say that the main things would be your settlement, where you're going to have things like NPC interactions, likely your quest givers, purchasing of goods, and then you're probably going to have some sites of interests like dungeons. And these dungeons can take many shapes. It could be like a mine, a military base, all sorts of things, even natural sites like waterfalls or mountains. And generally, you want to include things like enemies, loot, and as well as information. Would you guys say that's fair?
Yep. Something I would probably caveat that with is a lot of people get hooked on the idea of dungeons, and I think I've brought this up before. Encounters is probably the more accurate term. Encounters can be intimidating because everything in the game is technically an encounter. Any conversation with an NPC that could go good or bad, those are encounters. So as your characters or players are interacting with the world, things that they do can make an impact, good or bad, if you have a DM who is story minded and you have a DM who actually is able to articulate and keep up with the creative process that the players have. I'd say I want to caveat that as well, because I've been in games where the DMs aren't creative, and not busted on them. That's fine. They have their module that they're running. Their Wizard of the Coast module that they're running. They don't want to deviate. They're not comfortable deviating outside of that. So they have their sandbox, and they don't want to leave that sandbox. They want to stay inside the box, and they're comfortable there. So I want to clarify that.
Well, just want to say a bit there with the dungeon part, a little tidbit. Dungeon is just an overall term. It doesn't mean literal dungeon.
Yeah.
Towns are dungeons. A city, any place can technically be a dungeon. Like I said, it's pretty much places where you have some kind of encounter.
It's an encounter.
But
yeah, sorry, that's what I meant to say. But yeah, go on.
No, I was saying, but he was like, he doesn't like the term dungeon, but dungeon is in this day and age already known to just refer to any location in which said stuff happens. It doesn't even have to be just general social or battle encounters. Generally, weird things happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I doubt it. I disagree.
You disagree? I mean, listen.
I disagree that it's known. I disagree that it's known. Because like I said, I still meet plenty of people who their concept and idea of dungeon is not synonymous with encounter. They think encounter is outside of a dungeon. Like they'll be like, okay, here's an encounter. You're walking down the street and then bandits jump you. That's an encounter. But they also don't infer an encounter is you're trying to convince the mayor to give you guards as an escort to a location so that you can go inside the dungeon and kill people.
We travel two different sides of this universe, apparently, both like in YouTube and on other like places that do Dungeons and Dragons. I have seen like a lot of people consider various different things dungeons and various different things encountered, not just being battle. Right now, I'm really big into the OSR scene, been watching a lot of stuff like that, and kind of want to get into like some of the OSR games like Morkborg and stuff. And even back in the day from the old AD&D stuff, encounters were included, like social encounters were included in those, or things where like you run into another pack of, let's say, mercenaries along your travels. They look beaten and worn out. They're looking at you with their hands on their weapons. What do you do there? It's not automatically fight with them. The people are given a choice, and do you? It is also based on your word. Are mercenaries who that go aggro at each other? Are they people that can communicate and talk with them? It's Sorry, go ahead.
That brings up a good distinction that I can say that all dungeons are encounters, but not all encounters are dungeons.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because an encounter can, as you said, can be a various of things, and the entire experience that players have are encounters. They go encounter a tradesmith. They go encounter the king. Wherever they go, they are encountering something. They're always interacting with either the environment or the people, but not dungeons per se, because the word dungeon still holds its own meaning. And as you can see, our two registered DMs consume different content. So sometimes those words mean different things depending on the content which is consumed. But there's one universal meaning of dungeon. If someone hears dungeon, they automatically going to think something, a cave that they go into, or some kind of thing that they have to dive or delve into and rummage through until they come out from the other side. There are other uses for the word dungeon now, but everyone associates it, at least to them, something that they have to crawl through.
Will
Yeah,
there be a
and that was
dragon
the
at the end
distinction
there?
I was going for.
But so how about you though? We didn't fully get your full opinion on it though, Mr. Jackaran, there, on how you go about creating worlds.
Oh, my creative process is I start with, well, for my own world, I start with what's the environment like. So I start with, like, right now I'm actually doing some map building. So I start with what the environment is like. And it's like, okay, when you think about a planet and the world itself, how is the climate distributed? Where's the deserts? Where's the jungles? Where's the rainforests? Where's the Arctic? And I start from that premise. And from there, just like in our real world, you get an idea as to, okay, where is life able to thrive? And from a story perspective, life can thrive anywhere you want it to thrive. So that creates a rabbit hole to jump down where, all right, you have a people that can survive in the clouds. All right, their society is evolved. They're in the clouds. They walk on clouds. There's a stairway of magical clouds that access their home. All right. Well, what would it be like to live among clouds? How would these people travel from one location to another? How would their society evolve? How would it change? What would be the dynamics? What would be the politics? And I begin expanding upon each culture and society based on these little groupings that, again, come from how's the landscape of the world shaped? Is it an aquatic world? Is it a gas world? Again, I'm a sci-fi nerd, so I immediately go to what type of alien planet is this? And then I start branching out from there into the cultures and the different species, and I work from there. Then once I start developing the different cultures, that naturally creates political factions. The political factions help create armies and the militaries, and then you begin decorating the militaries. Okay, cloud people, they like using lightning blasts because of thunder and lightning and smoke and all that stuff. So, but then you get the mountain people. They might not necessarily use cold weapons. They might use fire weapons because they use the fire to keep them warm, and they worship fire because in the cold of winter, fire is what keeps them safe. It makes them feel safe. It makes them feel comfortable. So they've learned to just stand by the fire. Fire is always good. Fire can do no wrong. And this is how I just generally throw out ideas like this. And I think, like, okay, what type of creatures would these cultures worship? Would they have a worship? Do they have gods, and do they have deities, or are they atheistic? And then once you start going down that rabbit hole, you start thinking like, okay, what type of weapons, what type of taboos would they have? How would these guys evolve physically? Would they evolve gills? Would they evolve fins? Would they evolve scales? I go through all these sorts of ideas whenever I'm designing something, and that's typically my go-to. And then once I start creating these things, and it gets to the player aspect, and I start talking to the players, I start asking them, okay, what is it that you want to do with your character? And I start there. I start with the player with, what do you want to do with your character? Once they tell me what they want to do with their character, then I go down the road of, okay, I have these cultures or societies that align with what you want to do. And usually then the player asks me, I did this with you, Benefactor, when you were making Timaeus. You were saying, oh, I want to worship a god of law and order, but I want him to be evil. And I was like, well, funny you should say that, because I have a god who you might actually like. And it was one of the cool dark gods because his sigil was a wolf, because he himself was a wolf, or that was his manifestation, was a big black wolf with red eyes. And you took that. You were like, awesome, I have a cool god.
Hey, man, Koharu's cool. I'm still on the fence of which one I like more, Hector or Koharu. So I will say you did a good job on that one.
Hector's true god. Hector's true god.
Yeah, but I interacted more with Koharu. I sadly didn't get a chance to interact much with Hector. You got to interact more with Hector than I did. You got yelled at.
Well, more scolded by his vicious from a statue, saying that the weapon that I possess may be the key to winning the war. Like,
hey, that's more than I got. I got to get out. And got thrown out to heaven. Like, oh, okay. And then never talked to again.
Technically, I got thrown out to find you, so...
So yeah, so okay. I respect it. So is that how you would say you go about implementing players' backstories into the world? You create Crusader Jack?
Yeah, that's how I transition them smoothly into the world, because when they're making their character, I have to talk to them and extract out of them what's their goal, why are they here, and what is the player themselves after. Once you get all of that, you're able to say, okay, here's the options I have for you based on my world. Now, if they say none of those work for me, say they take the fifth option, they're like, none of that works for me. Then as a DM, I have to create something completely new specifically for this player. And it could be a sub-faction of an already existing faction. And I can compromise with a lot of players on that. It's like, okay, you guys want to be this Puritan society, or maybe you're a little bit laid back. You're not a part of the Puritans. You guys are like a subdivision. So it's a part of the Lion Empire, but you guys brand yourselves the Tigers. You guys aren't lions, you're tigers, and you're technically a part of the lion territory, but you guys are so small, you're not strong enough to actually take them on and overthrow them. So you're kind of just subservient, and you kind of just ignore their policies unless they're around. And again, I can work with players on all kinds of things like that if anything I present isn't in the line with what they want. Now, if they're doing something that is a blatant ripoff of something else, like say someone wants to bring in a faction from Conan the Barbarian. They want to bring in, I forget what the serpents are called, but they want to bring in the serpent cult. And I don't want that in my game. It's like, no, that serpent cult doesn't work here. It doesn't work in my game. Coincidentally, it does, but let's say it doesn't. Say someone tries doing that for Star Wars. It's like, okay, I can't really bring the serpent cult in. And at that point, I know within the limit of my realm, with the limit of my game, I can't allow that. So I have to throw that back to the player. You have to go back to the drawing board, sir. I can't work with this. And sometimes that's a deal breaker. Sometimes players are like, okay, I don't want to be a part of the game. That's fine. Sometimes they'll say, let me figure some way of doing this so that I can still play and do what I want. I can't control that. But sometimes that's what you have to do. You have to know the limits of your game and of the world building that you're envisioning, that you're putting the players into.
I agree. Oh, when you say it sounds so similar but so different. Like I said, I always try to really incorporate what the players give. This is also why I ask players, have your backstory in the background, because 5e gives background that you can pick. Try to have them be synonymous with each other and not be so far removed from each other. Because that also allows me to be able to see what you want and be able to coincide both things. So why you get these benefits from this background makes it with your backstory, and I will try to give you what you want in this world. Again, going back to Ms. Late Potato here with the whole Thieves Guild. Like I said, I already had something planned, but she had a name for it that she wanted, so I changed the name for it, which it coincide affected another character, but he didn't have a name for it. It's just that he was also involved with said Thieves Guild. So with that, I was able to work with Lady Potato here and giving her the dream scenario she wanted for her characters' backstories, in terms of that as well, because she's like, her background was a thieves guild. Got what the actual criminal thing was the background, and in that she had in her backstory as well that she ran away from her thieves guild after her boyfriend was abusive to her and ran away with their child. I end up going in and giving her all of that stuff, incorporating that whole backstory of her child abuse, all that, gave her a loving family, things like that. Things that I did have already, like you said, but I also changed a lot to make sure it would fit also what she gave me while keeping in line with another player, things I had for him in the woodworks, dealing with that these guild that I already had set up. So I say it's a lot of similar things with some differences between how you and I did players' backstories and how we let it change the world. I'm not too afraid of changing certain aspects into what's the word I'm looking for, of the world itself, to try to accommodate that player. Now, if it's something too massive, like you said, that's definitely not going to be possible. But for the most part, I at least try to make that clear with the players. Give me something reasonable to work with, and I will give you something that you will love.
Well, for me, where I kind of take a little bit from like both of you, I guess, I more set the tone of what exactly I want for my players and allow more freedom to have them do whatever they want to do. So if I had already come up with a story and background, I tell the players, this is the story, this is what's going to be about, and this is what's going to, happen in limited scope. And then I tell them specific parameters of things that I require. This is non-negotiable. Things that I require them to have in their backstory. The only thing I don't force on them is player connections, because some people aren't comfortable with that, as in maybe they're new to the table or they're not super friendly with some of the other players at the table, so they don't have, and I would rather them foster friendships through the game itself and then become friends that way. Now, if they choose to and have, relationships prior, in their backstory, that's all up to them. But I will never say like, hey guys, I kind of want you guys to be friends in some regard. No, I don't. Me personally, I don't do that. But I will say that I need a specific thing that needs to be incorporated in your backstory. After that, it's all up to you what you want to do. I give them the world, I let them know so they can insert themselves in my world however they choose, rather than me trying to mold the world to them. Right? It allows, I feel, more player interaction with the world, because now they have to understand what backstories exist, or have to pick a nation that they think they might sound cool or interesting to them, and then they work themselves into that. And normally I'm there right beside them saying what they can or cannot do. It's like, oh, if you want to be part of the royal family, this is required. They have to have particular physical traits or whatever, or maybe the noble family is more magically inclined, so you're more likely have to have a caster class. And if you can be an anomaly at that, maybe you were born with no magic, and that creates a whole new dynamic with the magic family. That, oh my god, we birthed a child that doesn't matter. Oh my, the court looks down upon us because we have a non-magical child. All that I put in the player's hands to decide how they want to fit themselves into the world. And once they do that, I will legit make whole continents and whole places that are specifically for that player if they so choose it. I've done it in various different campaigns. One of them was in Final Destiny. Each player had their own landmass that they named themselves and had a whole history that they developed on themselves that tied in directly to the story because that's what they wanted for their characters. And I find that makes them more invested in the overall world by giving them their own slice of the place created by them, not something that I created to fit for them, something that they created by themselves. And it also allows them to put as much or as little creativity that they want into it, because some people don't have that, creative spark to make this something really grand.
And I think
Yeah, I
you
was gonna
guys
say that's something that I noted with several of my games of having players where I I don't go that far of giving someone a continent, but I'll give them some leniency in trailblazing and sort of mini DMing within the game. And some players bite and take it. Other players they're just, nope, I want nothing to do with it. I see what the game is you're trying to make me do, and I don't want it. That's been my experience with it.
Which
and
I feel like will happen sometimes. And how I see it, if they don't want to bite, they shouldn't really have to. It's their experience, and if this is how they want to experience the game in a pseudo handicap, if even that's up to them. As long as they try to find enjoyment in what they're doing, that to me is the big takeaway.
And listening
Yeah.
to both of you, it showed me the difference in what and why we had that big difference. Because generally, when I write and make worlds, I usually have the aim not to be an overarching story, but usually be what the characters that are here playing. What is their goal in life for their characters to achieve and do? Is it to inherit the family and become the next head of their family? Is it to be a rank adventurer? Is it to be, find out about their father? It usually evolves around them and not any big thing that's going on.
While originally I used to do that, what I found is that a lot of people are not in the mindset to make goals for their characters. So what I adopted as a DM is just making games that facilitate the needs of the players themselves versus me trying to create something that I think they would enjoy. Because yeah, you want them to have these goals and desires, but what if a person is not being able to think of it, even with your help? Like, even if you sit down and try to guide them and they're just like, I don't know, you try to give them various different examples and things, maybe that they, whatever reason, can't do it because they've made a lot of pressure. I feel like leaving it in their hands, allowing them to create as much or as little as they want to, benefits them more than you trying to have them have some kind of desired end game goal for their character. Because what if they discover that goal while playing? What if they meet someone and then that inspires them to do something? As an example, is in a campaign that you're playing, my character never thought about a future because she thought she was going to die. She has a terminal illness and she thinks she's going to die. And then interacting with one of your NPCs and her helping her, she's like, oh, maybe now I have a chance of living. Maybe I want to be a doctor. She never had an end game goal, but was inspired by an NPC character that she interacted with, and now she's thinking about a future, and that creates a goal. You know what I mean? So I feel like you don't necessarily have to start off with a goal in order to achieve one, but leaving room that a goal can manifest, I feel like
Yeah.
is more important.
I mean, not having a goal could be an interesting way to start out the game because you're someone who, like, if you can handle that as a role playing aspect, either that or your goal that you're starting out with is one that can be attained relatively easily. Like, for instance, if you're starting in a jail, okay, your goal could be to escape. and then you could have that time where you're figuring out what you want to do to eventually come up with your next goal. And it's excellent. It also shows character development over time, because people's goals will change. Even somebody who starts out with one goal in the campaign, they could have a completely different one by the time it's over.
Well,
It
I
also goes into sub goals and character motivations changing.
But
and
that's
Yeah,
also
being flexible on things as well. We had a character like that in Scion. Remember, he wasn't sure if he wanted to be in the military. He wants to be, take his brother's place and being the head of the family and going through war. If he wants to be an adventurer, I also think it sounds like that. It's also a bit on DM to be a little bit flexible with leaving. And so I do agree. Leave a little bit open in development. Same with Evedalion with that goal. With him making that clear with his character, and having that newfound belief and newfound want. I feel that a DM should try to facilitate that as best as they very well can. So like I said, it's it is. I guess this goes into. I can't think of the right word. Eve, help me here. You're good at this. You're good at finishing my sentences.
Well, first I have to figure out what you're trying to transition into in order for me to help finish.
Oh.
Interacting with characters on a feedback.
No, I guess. We'll actually. That's a good leeway into something I want to discuss. But no, I guess this is more designing a overarching story versus designing a thing for individuals. But I guess I'll put it best that way. But what you did brings up a good thing, and we've kind of been talking about it within a whole discussion of world building. Is actually play character backstories and stuff. But the main thing that goes into this, as always, it will be player and DM interactions. You can't get this if neither the player or the DM is interacting with each other.
Pretty
And
much.
generally, players always have, and I know Crusader Jackaran knows this. I'm kind of, one of those players that generally always try to interact and talk with him. How do you go about, giving players things they ask for to fulfill their character fantasy? So not just their backstory and things like that, but say you have a character that wants to be the more MMORPG style tank, the ability to taunt foes and stand tall amongst them and block blows, something that 5e or doesn't really give to people and things like that. There's other games that some also don't really give, but I'm saying, just give an example to everybody out there. How do you go about giving players things they ask for to fulfill their character fantasies? I would like to start off with Crusader Jackaran because I want to hear his thoughts on that.
Well, for me, how I go about giving people abilities is I start with taking off from what was talked about earlier. When you talk to the player about, hey, why are you in my game? Okay, what do you want to get out of the game? And what are your ideas for the character? Once they start explaining that information to you, I begin saying, okay, how can I fit this into my game? I'll give you an example of my DC Vertigo. I had a player who wanted to make Superman, but not be Superman. He wanted to be a Native American Superman. Well, he changed that idea from Native American Superman to Native American Starfire. So his character basically was Superman, but he had his ideas of, okay, he wanted his character to be able to do these things that were similar to Superman and Starfire. And so I was like, okay, I now have the theme of his character. Okay. And when you watch him role play the character, that's a key thing here too. You have to let the character play before you give him anything. You might give him like a noob item. You might be like, hey, here's a whistle, or in this guy's case, I gave him a medicine man's ritual stick, like a Native American musical instrument. And his character could use that to tap into the spirit realm because his grandfather had taught him how to commune with spirits. So for him, it was like, okay, he's got this Native American theme. And then after watching in combat, he would assume the tank role. He would just, like Superman, he would throw himself in there to get attacked, beat up, and mangled. And his character, the way he role played it, even though his character sheet was getting torn up, damaged, bloody, and battered and beaten, the player would articulate his character as, I'm not phased. I'm good. We ready to go again? And it's like, okay, so this guy, the player, is trying to emphasize to the DM as well as to the other players, this character is made of steel. This guy is not afraid of dying. So now got to give him abilities, got to give him items and things that will help him live this fantasy that his character is trying to portray. So it's like, okay, this guy wants to be invulnerable. So I gave him items that temporarily made him invulnerable. And he loved it. He was like, all right, I'm going to use this ability right now and just completely not take any damage. But everyone would still attack him because his character put himself in the front line and made it very clear that he was the threat that they had to deal with. So I would say that's probably the way I go about it. I have to start with what little information they give me. Then I have to see them in combat and action and their role play. I have to see how do they role play this character in combat. And then I work from there as to what items do I need to give this person so that they can achieve the manifested idea they have of their character. If all that makes sense to you, great. I'm glad someone understands what I'm saying.
No, I get it. I get it. I don't want to hog up too much of the spotlight here, so I'll wait. I do want to hear.
All right,
from...
it's your topic, so I'm okay with you.
I can speak on it
this
next if you like.
Oh, please do, by all means.
Oh, so for me, it all once again evolves around the play group. You know, every play group is different. So what I try to do, I try to tackle it with the player individually. I go for the player and I'm like, hey, how are you building your character? You know, what are you trying to build towards? And I'm with them in that building process. So whether or not they have a clear defined thing of what they want or whether or not, I see it in real time, what skills, abilities that they're choosing, and you can kind of get a sense of where they're going. And you talk to them and you can potentially guide them into fully realizing what type of character they want to build. Now there will be players who already know what they want and they'll go right ahead and do anything, which saves you a lot of time as a DM when they already know that. After that, that's when I decide if that the players themselves, like the players, not the characters, the players are even capable of having extra abilities or weapons. Because this is not an offense to everyone. I struggle with mental health, and sometimes it can be overwhelming when I get too many things. You know, and there's some players out there who cannot handle an influx of abilities and spells and items and magical items and all these type of things that they have to consider in a myriad of situations and options. So by gauging the player and how much they can handle, that's where I decide how many abilities or skills I will give them myself. Now, if they themselves come to me and it's like, I want specific things.
Before we move on from that, I just have to ask, how long do you believe that wait?
How long do I believe that what?
Sorry, I was going to ask, how long do you believe that period is between, determining how long, like, how many abilities you could give your players? Like, how long do you think it usually takes you to gauge that?
It normally does that in the first hour or two of character creation, because depending on the system that you use, there's a lot of options and there's a lot of books, and sometimes that can be daunting. And by going through it with them, you can see their responses to it. They'll like sign like, I gotta pick this, I gotta go get that. It's like, what does this do again? Why is there so many things? Like that type of personality type indicates to me that if they get too many choices, they get overwhelmed with the various decisions of having so many choices. So I would talk to them and be like, hey, and help them through it. But that also gives me an idea of, okay, maybe they might not want so many items and or abilities thrown at them as in let's say a system that I'm adding to the game, or loot drops that I'm having. And I open lines of communication between my players. So if players tell me they want something or they want to achieve something on this particular item that they want, if it's not broken, I don't see any problems in either working to it or giving it to them within some reason. So it really
Yeah,
is like,
that's a good point. That's a fantastic point right there.
And it really takes, like I said, about an hour or two within the character creation process, because it can be daunting with certain systems like cough Pathfinder.
That's where I think you're smarter than I am, because to me, I can't tell that in the character process. I actually have to see the player in combat with their abilities and do nothing with them. It's like I watch players, they'll do that. I had this in my Star Wars game. I had a player years ago. This is years ago, not my current one. I had a player who his problem was he was playing a melee fighter. And in Star Wars, that's dangerous because any blaster shot can kill you. So this guy's playing as a melee fighter. And his method was, I'm going to hide and wait for them to come near me. And when you have a blaster, why would you ever go into melee combat? So I had to kind of like give him abilities so that his character could dive into combat, make an attack, and then dive out of combat or dive into cover. So he could do a hit and run. And once I gave him one ability and he didn't connect the dots. I gave him a second ability. He didn't connect the dots. I gave him a third ability. And by now I was like, okay, if he can't make all three of these work, something is wrong. And I was like, you know what? I'm tired of it. I'm not going to hold his hand on it. It is what it is. Well, he got himself into a really nasty situation with the party and people were going to die. And so he tried talking to me like, okay, I can't do anything. And so all I did at that point, it was like he teed it up for me. And then I swung and I was like, oh, really? There's nothing you can do. And he knew when I used that tone, he was like, hold up. I know why I feel like an idiot right now. So he's like, hold up. Let me see something. He starts going through his character sheet and he's like, okay, how does this work exactly? And so then I articulated it. He's like, okay, so theoretically I can use this ability and this ability to, and I was like, if you use those abilities, you could do this, this, this. I was like, oh, that's how that works. All right, then I'm going to use this ability and then this ability. And after that, it was like the light bulb came on in his head. He realized, wait a minute, the DM has been giving me these things. And this is why I haven't been using them, because I didn't ask the question, how do I use these? And from that point on, he got it. Like, he didn't have to use those abilities. He now understood he can dive into combat and dive out without those abilities, because those abilities do have a cost to them. They cost a vitality in Star Wars. But it's like, okay, you can now dive in, attack, and dive out without losing health. If you use the health thing, then it's a little bit more taxing, but you do get more damage out of it. So it's a resource management thing. But, like I said, I've learned that some players can handle it, other players can't. And I have to see them in combat to figure that out.
But that's more of about ability usage versus the number of abilities given in general. Because that's more of like, it's not that he got overwhelmed with the number of things you gave him. He just didn't understand how to implement or even use them clearly by playing something different to what he was, I guess, built towards. Because I personally have a player who did something similar, who built a sniper and did everything in his possible power to chuck grenades. But all his stats was sniper abilities and sniper and stuff. And he had items and things to improve his sniping capabilities. And he chose to just throw grenades. And he wasn't proficient at
bullseye. He wanted to be bullseye.
He wasn't proficient at throwing grenades. So it was a really big cluster mess of things. But I'm talking more about understanding that the player may not be able to handle if I give them 5 abilities versus, a player being able to handle having 1. For example, Benefactor here, he's one of the players who like having options. So he's the type of player that I know I can give him a myriad of abilities and he will pick and choose which one is the most optimal for which situation or which one is more useless. I had another player who's not like that. He can't handle having more than 1 or 2 abilities, no matter what it is. It doesn't matter what he's building, what he's playing. It's just his brain can't focus on having too many things in front of him. So the less I give him, the better his experience as in the game in general. And that's what I'm referring to. Like each individual player's capacity to handle what abilities or items that we the DMs can potentially give them. And like I said before, if the players themselves ask for things, then that's something completely different. It's like you are asking for the responsibility to have said item, or you want an ability of some kind that benefits something that whether they use it correctly or not, that's up to the players. We can't control whether they use the ability that we give them correctly, but we
Yeah.
can control how many abilities we give them in the course of a game that either is an addition to the game via homebrew, or we advance some levels fast enough so they get more abilities and assets as they level up depending on the system.
Yeah, but like I'm saying, my point is that I can't determine if too many abilities is a thing for a player or not. Like I actually have to see the player have a meltdown or some sort of complication. That's just my flaws unto themselves. So like, I have to see the player in a circumstance. Now, in my Star Wars game currently, I have a player who self-admittedly says, I am not a tactician. I can figure out what I can do under a circumstance and what I should do under a circumstance, but I don't know what anyone else should do. I'm not good at strategizing what other players should do. That's a guy who knows himself. That's a player who knows himself and is able to just communicate that to me as a DM. Now, there's very little I can do in game about that. It's like, okay, that's, I can't make the player do something they don't want to do or they can't do, especially if there's a real life blockage there. But when it's out of game, I can communicate to the other players and say, well, you guys should know you have a player that is telling you his flaw. He's telling you his weakness. And if that's his weakness, if you guys know that's his weakness, then you guys can strategize how to work with that. But, a lot of players that I've encountered, they don't upfront tell you like, oh yeah, I can handle a bunch of abilities or I can't handle a bunch of abilities. That's not something that typically comes into their mind as to things to talk about with the DM. So, I mean, I'm just saying that your method of in the first character creation session, you're able to decipher and figure that out. That's an ability I don't have. So I envy you for that.
Yeah, something that I've that's been burning in my head to ask is like, I would say most of the time when people are, getting ready for a game, they're not usually thinking about, oh, well, what am I going to be able to do outside of the rule book? So a lot of players may not be prepared for that. I know in our games, we're now used to that sort of style. But something that I think is important to ask is asking your players what they want to do and explaining to them, especially if they don't know, that they could get extra abilities or extra things that they can do. So do you guys ever take that approach to creating abilities for your players?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I would like to say one thing, real quick. Don't feel bad, Jackaran. Listen to both of you. I've done a little bit of both of you. I just failed flat out. I felt I failed utterly miserably at my attempts. I'll get into it later, but just don't feel bad. Silly, you've done better than me.
It's what I was talking about, to answer your question, Lady Potato, is I'm really hands-on when it comes to the character creation process. Even if I'm not guiding the player, I'm literally sitting there and waiting for them to ask questions. And if they don't say anything, I'll ask them, do you have any questions? Do you understand anything? Is there something that you would, particularly like? I'm trying to put myself in the position as a DM to vocalize the things that I'm allowing in my game And normally that involves like, hey, I like to do homebrewers editions. If you want abilities or whatnot, we can create abilities and I'll have them sit with me. And if they want to help curate that ability themselves, I'll go through that process. For example, I have a campaign that I ran before that I'm starting up again. It has something called research and development system. It's a creation, an item creation system that specifically focused on solely player interaction. I do not have any say of what items go into that item creations. Any item that goes into that development is created solely by the player. What I do is that I balance the item to fit the game itself so that it's not broken or fits the parameters of whatever system that it is, but it gives the player full control of what they want to add to their arsenal. If they want a particular item that enhances their ability, I'll allow it. I'll just make sure that it's balanced and it gets progressively stronger as they get progressively stronger. So they don't feel like the item in itself can be replaced by something. They can keep working on it and improving it to make it a stronger version of itself. And by doing so, it allows them to not feel like I have to push things on them that they're not ready for. They can create it at their leisure and then have something that they themselves designed, that they themselves want. Now, whether they use it or not is a completely different topic. But I give them the opportunity to know that this is a possibility for them that they can do themselves in the game. It's like, if you want to do this, let me know, and then we can discuss whether I will allow it or not, or I could try to find a way to incorporate it so that you can have something that you want that won't fundamentally break the game. I don't like giving players broken things. I'm just gonna put that right there. Like, broken is not in my vocabulary. Balance is.
Yeah, I don't think any DM wants to give their player something broken. I shouldn't say any, because but one friend told me this story about how DM gave her this item that allowed her to do whatever she could think of once per day. And because the character herself was kind of an airhead. So she would do something like see a rabbit and then use this item, this really powerful item, to be like, I want to see a top hat on that rabbit. Poof! Top hat appears on the rabbit. The item is burned. It's on cooldown. And for like the first 3 sessions she had this item, she was doing goofy things like that. Then she waited. 3 months went by in the campaign, and they're fighting a boss. Big bad boss. And she intentionally didn't use the item, kept it quiet, let everyone forget that she had the item. Then she asked the DM she wants to use the item to open a portal to a volcano inside the big bad boss's brain. And in comes all this lava into the creature's brain, killing it. And the DM was upset. He was like, what just happened? And it's like, you gave her an overpowered item. What did you think was going to happen? Like, come on, dude. So my gut instinct is to say, I don't think anyone wants to give their people overpowered items. They prefer balance. But there's reality. And I know of circumstances where DMs have made a very foolish decision in giving people overpowered items.
Yeah, I think that the overall approach, though, is to try and make your players what they want, or give them what they want, and also just being able to compromise on either side, whether it's you setting the expectation for your player to be like, hey, you're not going to be able to be, king of the empire, but you might be able to earn this barony in time. Or, if you want to be king of the empire, expect that to be sort of like a late game goal.
Oh man, you're trying to be like a king or something. You better we had to work for it. But yeah, that y'all exposed a lot there, man. I don't even know what to say to that. But I do agree. No DM sets to make something unbalanced when they do it. You know, everyone will make that one mistake and then make something really egregious that they gave to the player and look back and be like, "Ooh, what have I done?" I think there's no one here that can say they never
I've never done that.
done something
No.
like that.
Mm-mm.
Most people, none of them say, especially their first time, have done something like that.
Well, I agree, but you said in here, so I just wanted to make that correction that I have
I
not.
didn't mean as in in here, like with us four specifically.
I know, I'm just
But
busting your chain.
see, but dag man. When I go about making stuff for players, I try to do it. I guess I learned that more from Crusader Jackaran than anything. You know, I try to make it based on what I see from the players, as well as if a player particularly asks me for something. You know, if a player asks me and say to me they want to again be able to take blows and bring enemies to them, you know, I will give them set abilities with which they have to use and understand. Like you want this, you know, you I will give it to you, but don't just kind of like sit there and not use it, you know. And I also agree. I've learned from in my most long running game so far that if you give players a whole bunch of abilities, they will just brain fart it and just use the most basic thing they can see in that ability. And it's just sometimes nothing you can do about it. I've learned it's nothing I can do about it. I'm not even going to fret over anymore. You know, that's why I say I do not feel bad for Crusader Jackaran. I definitely feel worse than you. I've literally sat and made plenty of abilities and things, both very homebrew that I made myself, as well as abilities based on games I played, and I've watched neither set really work out well. The only person in more than two people in the game that have used for the most part the abilities I give them to the fullest. For those players, I know next time I can give them those things, they'll be fine with that. For the other players, I now know keep it simple, stupid. Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
Give them every just you want ability, they say if they come to me saying they want ability, I'll be like, okay, what kind of ability? That I'll do like Eve does and ask, what kind of ability do you want? And I need you to tell me what you want it to do. All right. At that point, if I give it to you in its balanced state and you don't use it, well, then fine. But I'm not going to try to, in essence, anymore, talk to people about like you have all this stuff that your character can do and sit there and even explain it to them and then watch them just fall back on, yeah, I attack. You know, I tried to make the game, especially like 5E, a little more dynamic for my players, in which they can do more than just attack. And that's something that me and you are kind of dull in with the game that we play on today on Thursdays, where we really just see the only thing that all the players are doing is I attack. And then I end my turn. I try to give them more dynamic to what they can do with those attacks. Try to give them different modifiers, different abilities within those attacks. I try to give them that pizzazz, very similar to Paladin, which I like Paladin a little bit, as well as Wizard. Give a little pizzazz there. Like Divine Smite gives you something, it is just attack. It gives you something a little extra, a rider to that attack. You get to choose if you want to use it. Just I try to give stuff like that. I try to give abilities based on the character. For Lady Potato here for her first character, Mara, I had a thing where she could teleport. She could throw a dagger somewhere and teleport to that dagger when I can't remember if it took movement or a bonus action, but she can throw the dagger at an enemy. After she throw it at an enemy, it'll drop within 5 feet of that enemy, and at any moment she can teleport. If she doesn't throw it at me, she can throw it anywhere. Honestly, it wasn't. But using enemy as a good example, she could just throw it anywhere. It wasn't ability I was able to give her yet. I can't remember what I gave her because she wasn't really using daggers. She ended up being very more crossbow. So I gave her a crossbow one that I made for her first. But I always try to do, give things that like the players would use. And I realized, that didn't work. Try to make things that would give the players something interesting, do more than just, binary attacking. And that didn't work. So, like I said, I think you did a good job, Shady Jackaran. I will let you know there's nothing enemies about the Evedalion because there's always someone worse, and I am that guy worse.
Well,
Oof.
I personally feel that however method that we use, it as you said, we all came to the same kind of pseudo conclusion. You know, And even if you guys say that I have a superior mindset when it comes to like gauging people before, and you guys have to do it, we all came to the same conclusion, though. You know what I mean? So I feel like people should take away from that some people will take longer to come to these conclusions or not, but it's always good to try your best to gauge your players and try to find out what works for them so they can also have a great experience in the game and less headache for you. I'll say that. Less headache for the DM, because sometimes it can be a real butt burner when we create things specifically for people and it doesn't get implemented or utilized. And for me personally, it doesn't kick as hard if they create it themselves and they don't use it. I'm like, well, you know, you created it.
Yeah, and then like feeling all your time has been wasted. So we thought last week on about homebrew stuff the DMs making things like that. I want to hear from somebody that she is a DM. She never really got a chance to do the whole making things fulfill people's character story. I would like to hear from Lady Potato though, as a player. What do you think about what we discussed?
Well, I think that overall your approach sounds pretty fair. Um, I like what Evedalion said about being very involved in the player's creation process. I think both as a DM gauging the ideas of your players and knowing what to expect is great, but also as a player discussing these ideas is crucial because it allows you to also gauge what your DM what you might expect from them going forward in the campaign world. Um, Personally, I have, been the player that hasn't always used their abilities, but I've also been the player that has used them. That for me has been, kind of, I've had to evolve to become that kind of player over time. But overall, I kind of said that it's important to just talk to your players about it. If you notice that, your players aren't using an ability or anything like that, maybe just talk to them about it. Be like, hey, are you not understanding this? Is talk just talk to them. That solves probably 90% of any issues and stuff. But I will say that your idea of, if they're not using them or if they're not really interested in using them, still leaving the door open for them to create their own abilities. I think that's a great solution because on one hand, you don't want to cripple your players who do want that stuff, but you also don't want to leave out the players who aren't going to be as actively using it either.
Oh, and there we go. It's been decided. Evedalion, you've won DM of the Year award. You clearly been.
What I find is that with allowing players to be more involved in creating their own abilities, it also sets the tone for other players when those abilities that the other players create gets implemented. Because then it goes, wait,
Yes.
I could do that too. And it kind of fosters this kind of camaraderie thing in the group where sometimes they're bouncing ideas off each other to be like, oh, can we make a new ability that we can combo off each other or whatever? Or, it creates dialogue, which can potentially be beneficial for the game in general. So I'm not trying to win no DM of the Year awards. I just interacted with so many different personality types and seeing how many different people over the years and how they interact and just meeting new people. That's one thing I love about D&D is the connection that we make along the way. Corny, I know, but it is. It allows me to just see so many different styles of people and personalities, and you got to accommodate for those because you never know which personality types are going to be sitting at your table.
Right. And that was something, I'm glad you brought that up because part of my interest of doing this whole streaming thing is sharing experience. Something I see and I've learned when I talk to just various DMs through the games I've played is I'll pitch them ideas. They'll have an idea and I'll watch them. I'll watch their game. I'll play in their game, and I'm observing the DM. That when I'm a player, I'm always observing the DM. I don't give a crap what the other players are doing. Don't care. They're doing their thing. I'm watching the DM first and foremost. The first 3 sessions of any game, my eyes are on the DM. And I want to know how he rules. I want to know what boundaries there are, what wiggle room do I have to work with? So the first 3 sessions are always spent looking at him. And when they do something that I question, I don't understand, I'll ask them, I'll poke and prod them about it. And depending on how they answer that question determines, do I want to stick around in this game? And I'll ask them questions and they'll shoot back at me asking me questions like, okay, why are you thinking that way? Or what's on your mind? And I love doing the one, I give the example of meeting King Arthur in this one game. And the DM had us meet the equivalent, the world's version of King Arthur. And we meet King Arthur. We saved King Arthur's son. And the whole reason the DM had us do this was just to get us from one town to another. And I was like, why? Like, why doesn't King Arthur give us a quest? And he was like, I didn't think about that. And I'm like, okay, so all right, I get we're too small time for King Arthur, but like have Lancelot walk in or have Merlin walk in, have someone give us something to do because we're there. And the DM was like, well, I didn't think of that. Those are good ideas. And it's just a matter of experience. That's what it comes down to. It's this guy didn't have the experience, the knowledge and foresight to say, hey, this is a good idea. So I like sharing that knowledge. I like sharing that, hey, this is something, a story mechanic you can do. I'm very big on don't have things unless you're willing to expand upon them. Don't have, like, I love throwing out threads. I love throwing out stuff. Let the players grab on whatever they want and let them explore those threads. Let them travel and see what they want to do with it. I'm big on that. I love that. And that's part of what I like about D&D. It's probably a major thing I like about D&D. But sharing the knowledge, engaging with other DMs, and letting them know, hey, there's more than one way to do anything in D&D. And also, if something I was also going to say is about letting players design their own abilities. I do that in my games through crafting. That's typically how I do that. I let the players craft their equipment. Now, I give them a framework of like, okay, here's the weapon mods you have. We talked about this last week. Here's weapon mods you can have. You can design these things as you want. And I create all kinds of different like interactive abilities, but also passive abilities. So the players can design their equipment, their armor, their weapons, their gear and gadgets, however they want to work with their play style. You know, my players in my Star Wars game right now are looking at, okay, we want to have a suit for loud heists where we're running around and shooting through the streets. But then we're also looking at having a stealth suit so that if they need to sneak around on stealthy heists, they can do so without getting caught or in a lot of trouble. That's just how I do it. In 5e, I actually just come up with loot ideas alongside crafted items. I actually asked my players in 2 different games. I asked them, what do you guys prefer? Do you guys prefer loot drops where you have special items that come from the loot? Do you prefer player crafted items? And both times the answer I got was, we like both. So whatever you give us, we'll work with. So that tells me it's like the players don't really care. They don't really care about necessarily the loot. They just want loot. They want equipment and things to do. You know, that's how I inferred that.
Okay. And you bring up something too, which is great. You know, you just explained a bit how you interact with your players. I would like to go a little more in depth with that, how you interact with your players on generally feedback with the game, you know, and how you go back and forth, talk to your players. So a good example is me and you have always had, in my opinion, a very good DM play relationship, even on both ends of the spectrum. You know, we also talked the other week with a situation where, you know, Tomias is a great example where, you know, I would tell you when you give us stuff, again, maybe crafting, maybe personal abilities you've given me that I can choose from a list from. I've always given you feedback on those various things like this would not work, or while it's nice, it's not very effective, you know, things like that, or why I wouldn't use this, or why no player would particularly use this. because it's not an ability that is, I guess you say, versatile. And same you where we talked about where your monk character Gustav, where you did wish you taught me more on what you would have wanted, like when I had let you do a quote unquote Lee Sin kick and let you kick the guy away. You kind of wish you did talk to me a little bit more on that regard of giving you that ability than the one I did give you, which, that's something that a lot of players and DMs sometimes miss in general, not just on items or abilities, but general feedback with the game and having real core conversations with them. And this is something that Eve had made me realize that I was doing. It wasn't something I did super constantly, but I would always ask my players after the game, you know, how was the game for you? You have fun, any issues, like, how did the game every week go? I would always ask them and really have that kind of talk with them and see what they would say. Now, sometimes you get a lot of the players that'll just be like, oh, yeah, it was fun, and don't give it to you. Sometimes you'll get players like Eve, sometimes even Late Potato, that will really sit there and be like, well, and actually talk about the game and various things. And I'm just curious to hear from other DMs, how do they take feedback from their players and, things that they talk about with their players before, during, and after the games that they play. I'm quite curious of that. Beside Potato, I like the other new boy here. I sound like I'm experienced, but it's because mostly comes from being a player. I want to hear people that have been DMing a lot longer than I have to really chime in. And I would like to hear from Late Potato as a player, her like thing with her side as a player, and talking to DM interactions as well. So, who would like to take up my opportunity to teach me something?
I would say let's have Eve lead that off because he's the guest here.
Sure. So I have pretty much the same thing as Benefactor. As I stated before, I'm very involved in the creation process uh, with the players. So I established very quickly and very early to my players that you can ask me about anything. And if I see there's any tension or feel like they're too nervous to ask something, I'll ask them questions. Is everything okay? How you liking the class so far? Try to, engage in some kind of, in a sense, side conversation that still pertains to it, to like ease them in to continue having a dialogue about whatever the topic that we need to discuss involving the game. Now, when it comes to just like how how the people like the game, I tend not to have those conversations a lot. I tend to have the, is there anything do you want to improve in the game, or the anything that you personally didn't like. I don't try to ask open-ended questions that allow them to interpret. I like try to be like clear questions. So like, what did you not like about this session, right? Rather than did you enjoy the session? Because you can be like, yeah, you'll tend to get those type of answers if you ask those type of questions. But if you ask very specific and niche questions, depending on your rapport with the player, they might give you a more detailed response and be like, well, this part of the campaign I didn't enjoy, but I enjoyed this part of the campaign, or this aspect of the story I didn't like. Another thing that I like to ask is, because I incorporate their backstories a lot into the game, players tend to create NPCs that are either really close to them or have some kind of relation to them, and I always find some way to bring them into the story, to them to have either communication with. So I end up playing a lot of their characters. So I'll ask, did I play your character well? For example, there was this one campaign that I was playing with the Benefactor, and he gave me some ideas of how he wanted his mother and father to be like, and personality types, and how he wanted them to portray themselves. And after I think the first two sessions, I asked him, like, did I do a good job portraying the parents that you want? He's like, oh no, you did perfect. You did great. I love that, the fact that you did this with my mom. He's like, you got them down to a T. And that was just the best case scenario. Another character that I do, another person said, well, no, this character is more like this and they should be more like that. And I took that into consideration and changed. And then when I played that character again in the next session, I asked him, did I do a better job this time? He said, yes, I did do a better job. And it made him feel really good that I took what he said into consideration and actively worked on my performance in bringing to light a character that he envisioned. It made him feel like, wow, I was really, invested in the stuff that he created. And that's how I personally feel that we as DMs should be invested in our players, because we expect our players to be invested in our work.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's really good, because something that as DMs, what's really fun about being a DM is playing the different characters. That's really fun. In my games, I sometimes pawn that off onto other people. It's like I'll let someone else play out their NPC or another person's NPC if they're comfortable with it, because the players talk amongst themselves, and if you have a duo of 2 people or 3 people who've coordinated together, like, hey, this is our idea of a character. I'm thinking of a Lady Potato and Clank's brother and sister combo in my one game. They both had a coherent idea together of what their father character was like, and they had to articulate that to me. And based on both of their separate articulations of it, it was like, okay, I get an idea of what this character is supposed to be like. And then as you play, these 2 characters are telling other people about their father and what he is like. And that helped me get the idea of, okay, this is how this character is manifesting to me. Because there's also like father-son or father-son, father-daughter aspect. There's a little bit of a skew there where the kids might have a little bit of idol worship, and they brush under the rug how a character like a father or a mother would have flaws. Then again, they might also look at those flaws and highlight them, like, oh, he was a very angry man, or he was a very sad guy, he was very emotional, or he kept to himself. These are like little tiny cues and things you have to pay attention for when you're hearing about someone else's character that you're going to be playing.
I agree.
Lady Potato, do you want to chime in and offer your 2 cents?
Yeah, I think I kind of want to talk more about my experience as a player in this scenario, because I haven't really had that many experience of this particular uh, subject at hand. I will say that in terms of how to talk to your DM about these, if you're having any concerns about the game, um, I would always advise to do so, depending on the circumstance, when it's appropriate. Um, I generally like to call, if I have any issues, try and save it for when we're not, during the game, because I understand that my DM has a lot on their plate. And overall, my, but however, if it is something that is immediate concern, it's always better to just talk to them. Be like, hey, I'm having this problem, or hey, this is a real big problem. You need to change this right now. But generally, I know I keep repeating myself, but I do have a policy that is pretty much universal towards everything, which is just try and your first approach should always be to talk and be open to compromise, be open to discourse or disagreements, and that has been something I've had to work on as a player, because I'm not naturally someone who's very confrontational, but fortunately D&D is entirely the experience of resolving conflicts, and over time you build that skill. But I guess that would be my 2 cents on it. I would say overall, the DMs here that I've had, which is Crusader and the Benefactor, I have not been in Evedalion's games yet, but I would say that you guys have accommodated the things that I have asked for in the past, and overall I've been very pleased with what you've provided me.
I would I don't want to go too much down that rabbit hole, but I would say, um, do you have any ideas or things you want to share of things that you didn't enjoy? Like he was talking about earlier, how I had in with Gustav, he had given me. I can tell you, Benefactor gave me this he gave the party this one item that I was like, why the hell would I ever use this? And it was like a cursed monk's glove. It's like, oh, you do some fire damage, but you also go insane. And it's like, yeah, I'm never going to use this item. Thanks, DM, for giving me an item I'm never going to use, because why the hell would I want to make myself go insane? So do you have anything like that where it's like you tried working with the DM, or I would say probably earlier in the game where you're talking to the DM and the DM, either myself or Benefactor here, we just completely got it wrong. Just we didn't understand anything that we walked out of that conversation with. Do you have anything like that, Potato?
Sorry, I just noticed that the Benefactor mentioned that according to him he always gets it wrong, but that's not always entirely true. I've I was but sorry, Benefactor. The story was actually from your campaign. There's only really one sort of, I guess, major thing that kind of I guess wasn't my expectation, and that would be that the Benefactor kind of got the dynamic wrong with my second character in his campaign, Rebecca. Sort of that dynamic between the parents and the child. I tried to kind of make more of a dynamic if they were going to have more pressure on her, but then when he actually played it, they were more easygoing, which wasn't what I expected.
Okay.
That would be the only thing I'd say.
Now,
That's
I
coming to
also
mind.
want to turn this over to Eve, because we hear a lot about you as a DM, but I'm going to ask you as a player. What has been your experience where a DM has gotten it just completely wrong, your idea or your concepts of this is what I want to do, or this is an NPC my character interacts with? Do you have any stories like that you want to share?
Surprisingly, I don't. I don't get a chance to be a player that often, and when I am a player, I tend not to make NPCs that the DM can utilize in that way. So I haven't really got to experience that yet. For them to get
Okay.
to get wrong in that sense. I've had it where they've misconstrued my character concept, but after discussing, about it
Well,
was
explain that a little bit further, right? Like, I get you're like, okay, there was a happy ending to that, but like, okay, how did that progress? Like, they misconstrued your character. Was it like in the first session, second session? When did it start and when did it end?
so it was the first couple of sessions. Uh, I kind of don't like making goody two shoe characters, but I'm not a big fan of like purely evil characters for the sake of evil characters. I like people who address situations with nuance, where they may think about doing something that might not be morally just, and the DM took that as my character was evil. That my character would just do things, indiscriminately evil, and anytime I made an action that didn't seem just, he would, in a sense, pseudo punish me. For by making the situation more drastic than it was. For example, there was a town that was suffering from an undead a curse. The party had failed to solve the problem. Like whatever the solution was, the party as a whole failed, and then there was really no way of currently right now that we could think of to thing the curse. So my character was like put every person to the torch to spread to stop the
Call
spread.
the entire town.
Yeah, we don't know who's infected, and we can't really control the outburst, and we don't want it to spread. So my character convinced the other players that that was the appropriate option. for it. And the DM was like, why would you do something so evil? And I had to really explain to him, I'm like, technically it's a mercy for everyone else. And he was like, what about the innocent people that are in there? I'm like, that's just collateral sometimes. Sometimes you have to sacrifice the small to protect the many. And, he was like, well, that's going to change your alignment. This guy was really strickler on the alignment system. He was like, that's going to change your alignment because I was chaotic neutral as my alignment. He's gonna make you chaotic evil, and things are gonna start being able to detect you. Spells that target evil people is gonna focus you. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah, I probably would have pushed back at that and said, well, if anything, that would have made me lawful evil.
See, the thing is, he didn't
Like-
say that out directly. This was the course of a couple of sessions. I started to notice the difference in the creatures and how people would treat me, and then I brought it to his attention. That what I'm saying is just how I culminated all the events
Yeah.
that happened. I just noticed that I was just a target of a lot of things, even when I wasn't making quote unquote evil decisions. He would just expect me to do evil things, and I was like, no, my character's more ambiguously gray in certain areas, and will be willing to do things not so just for the greater good. It's still the intention for the greater good, but sometimes you literally have to put things to a torch. Like, no one bats an eye when you have to slaughter a whole village of orcs to save the human village, right? Aren't the
Yep.
orcs living, breathing people that have their own culture? They have shamans, they have priests, they have all these type of things, but we slaughter them indiscriminately and no one bats an eye. Why do they don't get the same things as like humans? In a sense, humans can be just as evil, if not worse, than the other quote unquote monstrous races.
Yeah.
And-
And that's where, like, if you can use some verbal jujitsu, you can make the other player, hopefully, it sounds like you were dealing with an old school DM.
Yeah.
If you can use some verbal jujitsu to articulate them, some James Edwards logic of how would I feel if I'm over here working on the treadmill and some dude busts in and just caps me, and this guy over here, he's not snarling, he's sneezing,
Yeah. What I realized is that it was just a miscommunication to me explaining how my character thinks and behaves. And once we sat down and talked about it, plus with the help of the other players saying that my actions were inherently evil, we're sitting down, it corrected itself, and I was able to have a better experience. I had to eventually leave because of scheduling regions, but it worked itself out. One situation that didn't work itself out was with another DM, where I was playing a bard, and I was playing Pathfinder, and they have an ability called Fascinate, and I was using an instrument. And as long as I'm playing that instrument, if they failed to save, the target would be fascinated by the song that I'm playing. It would perform no actions other than listening to my thing. Now, this character had just destroyed like a house, burned something down, was trying to flee. So I stopped them from fleeing, and then instead of the players interrogating them, they outright killed them. Right? The DM blamed me for it. And then I swear to you, the next encounter, every creature, every monster was immune to bardic abilities. Like, nothing I did worked.
Yep.
That's
And-
just a DM being salty, though. Like, I understand that DMs will tailor their abilities to target certain abilities or counter some of your abilities, but doing that like the next combat and it's like, oh no, every single one. They're just clearly just trying to fuck with you or
Yeah,
mess with you.
it was really frustrating because it was like I didn't make the decision to murder his important NPC. I saw an opportunity where his NPC was trying to run, and I fascinated it so my team can apprehend the target. They just decided, because I couldn't even do anything. The moment my character stopped playing, the target would no longer be fascinated. So I had to sit there and watch as the players just like started shanking this individual.
Oh
I'm
my
like,
God.
and I'm like, why?
That sounds great. That sounds great, but also beautifully disastrous.
No.
I just want to say though, like
And Benefactor, you know this DM in real life.
yeah. I just want to say though, with the first story, I have no idea what to talk. Did the other characters also agree to burn the village down?
Yes.
And you're the only one that was considered chaotic evil
The
because you made
reason
the
why,
suggestion.
because I convinced the others, because some people weren't okay with the idea to begin with, and because I did role play as I'm supposed to do, and convinced the other players that we have no way. We established the fact that we have no way to control the curse. We know that the curse is growing and going rampant, and it only spreads from contact to contact.
This is what so we told last time I go into. There is more than one person in a party. If they all agree to, even if you're talking about like someone convinced them, at that point you would have to realistically, you want to punish that play, you need to punish the whole party. They all agreed to burn it down. No one stopped it. No one did anything to put it out. Everybody's like, you know what? You're right. Let's do. That was a party decision. You want to say, hey, the party's chaotic evil for that? You know what? I would be like, sure, whatever. You know what I'm saying? But the punish the one player on it. And this is where I hate people's definition of evil when it comes to, well, general, but just say D&D. You know, as both of you know, I'm an evil guy. My characters generally lie on the evil side, generally lawful for the most part, but generally on the evil side. But evil is so just not just, oh yeah, I was just burning this village down. You know, there's evil acts with a good moral heart behind it. You know, there's various tinges one
I
can say.
don't exactly agree with that, but carry on.
I'm not going to go in
I'll elaborate
depth
in a
on it.
moment.
I'm not going to go in depth on it, right? Where we can say alignment for a whole nother thing. All right. I'm just trying to give miniature specs of examples. All right. So please don't go overboard. We are really saying
I'm going to go overboard.
No, please save it for another like tale, please. I do want to do an alignment session. You know, and I just hate how people treat people that are evil. Now there are people that are chaotic, stupid, or evil, stupid. You know, but I just hate that it happens. I had a similar scenario, but this was player and player, where it's just, which I mentioned before. I didn't even kill anyone. I didn't attack anyone. How am I the evil person in this group? What?
Mm-hmm.
Because I fed a dead body to a dog that he traumatized, and kid that the dude traumatized to. But yeah, the guy that didn't attack anyone, didn't kill a single thing in this place. I am the evil.
Yes.
You are the evil child.
You know, I just don't understand, man. I feel so sorry hearing that first one. This is not one you told me before. It really grinds my gears here to hear that. As a guy that likes evil characters, like that's tame.
See,
Well,
that's the reason why I didn't tell you.
He brings up a good point with that though, because like one thing I do with all of my games, even the Star Wars game, I present the players with how I define the alignment chart. Okay, I have a little infographic. It's I'm a DC Comics fanboy, so I put the DC Comics characters on it, and it's like respectively to, you know, the alignments and morals of these characters. Where do they fall? And most people get it. Okay, but also there's descriptions and definitions as to, okay, this is the philosophy of that alignment. And I caveat it with, just because you do one thing evil or you do one thing good doesn't upend the whole laundry list of things. The Joker can do some good. Okay, you can manipulate him into doing something good, and he'll think, yeah, this is the evil thing to do, even though it's actually the good thing to do. All right? That doesn't mean Batman can't do something evil, and it's for the totally good and noble reasons for doing it. So I mean that's a very good point that I want to bring up regarding, you know, alignments. And something I do with character creation is I make sure to show all of the players. In Star Wars, it's the Force, and in the Force, the Force is a lot more stricter than alignment. However, how I'm playing a 3.5 Star Wars, so to get any sort of Force points, to get dark side points is easy. You just have to do something horrible, like kill someone. Dark side point right there. For the light side points, it's a lot harder to obtain. because you have to do something not just good, but you have to do something that is good in the sense of nature and the cosmos. So putting an end to the dark side, putting an end to something that is evil, that is something that will award a force point and actually heal the galaxy. Because in Star Wars, it's balance versus corruption. So when you destroy corruption or heal corruption, you are doing the bidding of the force and nature, and it's a good thing. If you are promoting corruption, murder, torture, theft can be a part of the dark side because it's a part of greed and passion. If you're doing these things, you're promoting corruption. You're promoting the destruction of the universe and of nature because you're promoting and encouraging more of that chaotic element. And so in that game, I had to like tell the players, all right, here's how I define evil. Here's how I define good. And make of this wherever you want to put your character. This is my metric for how you can gain either side points. I know Benefactor here, when he was making his character for my game, my Star Wars game, he was looking at the base core rulebook and how to gain dark side points. And I'm like, yeah, I don't agree with that. How the base core rulebook is, if you use a dark side force power, instantly you gain a dark side point. And you might think that's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing because every time you use a dark side point or a force power, you have to do a wisdom saving throw. Otherwise, you get corrupted if you fail. And the saving throw gets higher and higher. So eventually what happens is you get so corrupted, your constitution drops, and once your constitution gets to a point where you're technically dead, you don't actually die. You lose control of your character and it gets given over to the dungeon master. The dungeon master can then use your character and you have to create a new character because you died, basically. Your characters just got consumed by the dark side and they're now just this husk that is ever striving to become a whatever, like a specter or whatever it is that the dark side user is, their quest is. I'm more lenient on that. If someone wants to play a dark side character, it's like, okay, you have to do something genuinely evil or horrible. Am I still here? You guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. You have to do something genuinely evil or horrible. And, murdering a thug, while it is murder, as a DM, I wouldn't necessarily consider that evil. Because in the grand scheme of things, that thug, that thief or murderer himself, he had it coming. And so that's a natural balance within the order of the universe and the cosmos. So when you come to something like, we should burn the entire town to spare the plague and stop it from going anywhere, we should cull the entire town, I would look at that as, okay, that's more of the neutral option. Because the good option would be, let's go ahead and cure these people. We're going to actively seek how to cure them. The evil option is, let's spread the plague. Let's infect as many people as possible, or let's cluster all of the people together and find out who's sick and who's not. And we'll find out from that, just examining each person individually, and then we'll segregate them and isolate them. You might say that's also neutral. So I look at it as like culling the town is the middle of the road for both options, for good and evil. But it sounds like to your DM, his perspective is, no, that's an evil option.
Well,
Out.
that's because of how strict he was on the alignment system. Me
Yeah.
personally, I do away with it altogether. I don't agree with the alignment system. I find that it is too restricting. My opinion is, if we are trying to make functional people, and we're supposed to have people with aspirations, desires, fears, wants, etc., we are people of nuance. all that changes depending on all based off our experiences. If we're getting real technical, the majority of people fall under the category of lawful neutral, law-abiding citizens that will sometimes break the law for various reasons, whether they're starving or whatever. But if a majority of the world falls under lawful neutral, how are we making characters that are not also lawful neutral, that can then make decisions and then change because of nuance? So in my opinion, I do away with the alliance system, and like your actions determine who you are as an individual. What I will do is I'll set the parameters of what good and evil means to the masses. Like, what do the masses determine what's good versus what's evil? And then we get to the individual towns that have their own nuances. There's some towns, for example, that view ritualistic sacrifices as something good, as other places were like, you're literally ripping out people's hearts. Like, how is that good to sacrifice it to some god? Like, how is that good? You know?
Maybe the
Well-
god, when you do that, rain crops so that the other 100,000 people can survive.
Yeah,
Well,
but
that goes into, I'm thinking of the Frost Maiden module for 3rd edition, where it's full of that. It's full of, I think her name's Jarl. It's, hey, give us your summer crops, and you won't have bad things happen to you. And going back to world building, that goes into, what are the ramifications to this world that you designed? And if I didn't bring it up earlier, I meant to. It's gods and how do they fit into everything? What type of gods would your peoples worship in the desert, worship in the mountains, worship in the ocean, worship in the clouds? So, you're saying like, do away with alignment. That I disagree with. We'll have that conversation. That's something I would probably like my brother to hop on and talk about if he's inclined to it. But with that alignment, I agree with you that lawful neutral is probably most people on Earth. That is their alignment. I would say it's probably the majority, with probably 10% falling into the evil sphere or evil realm somewhere, or chaotic realm. But what I would say a little bit more in depth about alignment and good versus evil in world building is I wouldn't factor in, I wouldn't transpose, I wouldn't conflate the civilian and the civilization's definition of good and evil with the cosmos's definition of good and evil, which is why I reference like the Force. Your approach comes at it, sounds more like a psychological angle of it, where there's positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. Positive is it's encouraging a thing to happen, and negative is discouraging a thing from happening. Whatever the things are ambiguous. It depends. Like, abusing someone could encourage someone to become more abusive. So that's considered positive reinforcement. Even though the outcome itself, many would say, is not a positive outcome, it's the term positive reinforcement means you're encouraging one characteristic or trait, and negative reinforcement is you're discouraging another negative or another trait or characteristic. So I think there's a little bit of conflation there with your idea there, Eve, where you're saying like, I'll tell them what the town thinks, but I'm not going to hold them to any sort of alignment.
the reason why is because, if anything, I feel that the alignment system only works for the divine, because divine beings are the extremes of those alignments. But we, as being thinking beings of nuance, cannot fall into those extremes easily. We are naturally more inclined to sway. We are like the pendulum. We go from one side to the other, sometimes shaking in between, while deities or divine beings or things that but from the cosmos are unflinching, uncompromising. They stay on that side, they stay in that niche all the time. That's why you have lawful good deities, chaotic good deities, and so forth. They stay where that thing is. It's why so many like clerics and things have
It's
a
their throne. It's
doctrine.
their
Yeah,
throne room. It's
but
their kingdom.
there's a reason why there's a doctrine that you have to follow as a paladin or a priest that worship these gods, because you have to fit that mold that they're demanding, that they're saying that in order for me to bless you with something, you have to follow these set of course of rules. But most humanity in general, or humanoid creatures, don't do that. So why should they adhere to an alignment system that, in my
Well,
opinion, is built for the divine?
well, I get what you're saying in that, but I'd push back at that with not just, so I was gonna say Star Wars, not just Star Wars, but also Dungeons and Dragons. Um, elves, elves are so different from humans in lore. Dragons, Dragonborn, are so different from humans. Dragonborn and elves both, I would not say they're lawful neutral.
But that goes back to the point that I was saying about the town or the village or whatever would set what is good or evil by their own standards. Like you said, elves are different from humans because culturally they're different. Therefore, their moralities of what's good and evil
Not,
will
no, I
differ
wouldn't. I would go
sometimes.
further than that. Not just culturally, biologically, they're different. So a human might struggle to understand like lawful, good, evil. They might just say, "Well, it's practical. Everyone would do it." Where an elf would be like, "No, you just don't do it." Like it defies the laws of nature. It tarnishes the laws of nature. And as an elf, it's not that I've been taught this. It's not like I just experienced it or something. It's ingrained into my persona. It's ingrained into how I'm going to bring up Warhammer. Warhammer is great with this, where in Vermintide 2, the human character and the elf go back and forth over their debates, where the human says, the elves should work with the humans. If the elves were actually more transparent and more open to working with humans, we could end this whole back and forth with these our enemies quickly. And the elf shoots back and says, see, humans are at their best when they're the most assured of their actions. The elves are at their weakest when they do that. And that's a very, very clear contrast of their different societal differences, but also their genetic differences. Elves are agile, they're small, they're quick. So, but they're also fragile. They're very much more fragile than humans are. So their entire culture comes from the lens and the perspective. Okay, if we get hit by a log, it can be our death. Humans come at it, no risk, no reward. It's a completely different design and philosophy, and it comes from our genetic evolution. It's just the way our species have evolved. Dwarves are a lot more hardy and very much reckless. It's just a rock that hit your head. What's the big deal?
But that's exactly what I was talking about. What you're speaking about is what I refer to as nuances. And that's why I would do away with the alignment system, because with what you're saying is that nuances allow all these dynamic things to happen because of all these differences that they have. Adhere by these alignment personality types. You basically you force them into a particular mold, which doesn't leave room for nuances, doesn't leave room for example, drows who are known as slavers to do away with that culture and want to be like, hey, I'm not a drow that condones slavery. I don't follow what my other people go. I go against that. But what? Because
Yeah.
genetic? Because he's genetic, he's supposed to be the slave-toting, mongerer. Like, no, it takes away from his personal choice to be a living, sentient being. if he just fell into the, well, this is my culture, my being says this, and that's what I feel like alignment pushes people towards. It may not force them, but it pushes
Yeah.
them more towards filling that niche. And that's why I just do away with altogether, because you can still have the same storytelling without ever bringing alignment into question.
Yeah, that's true. But see, like alignment in this case, okay, what I'm talking about is it's not like, oh, you have to act a certain way. And that's something that I think we both agree on, is the DMs who are very strict on alignment. It's like you don't have to act. The purpose of alignment is to give you a ballpark of how generally your character approaches a problem or approaches a situation. This is how generally he aims to accomplish a goal or a means to an end. I have my dwarf slayer in Potatoes game, and he is lawful good, but he is set out to find an enemy who will kill him in honorable combat. And for all intents purposes, most people would consider a dwarf slayer chaotic good, chaotic neutral, probably chaotic neutral more than anything, because it's a completely selfish thing that they're set out to do, but it's also a paradox or an oxymoron, where they're seeking something selfish for honorable reasons. And I look at my character Hal, who's like, okay, I'm out to find honorable death, but I'm willing to still partake in life. I'm still going to do good things. I'm still actively trying to help people and do things like that. Now, does that mean my guy isn't above doing something chaotic? No, he's fully capable of doing something chaotic. Does that mean he's also not opposed to doing something evil? If he sees the right reason or motivation for doing it, he'll do it. And that's what I'm saying. Like, alignment to me it's a ballpark. It's an indicator to the DM. It's a tool to say, okay, this is generally the data point of where my character lands when it comes to a situation. And everyone has their circumstance where they're going to go to the exact opposite of their usual answer. So the lawful good character has a circumstance where he will do the chaotic evil option. It's a matter of, is that character going to either take that option, or are they likely to say, no, I'm not that guy. Like, that's not me. Sorry if we drag this conversation on. I know Lady Potato and Benefactor are like, man, they had to talk about alignment.
Well, I would say that pretty much my stance on alignment is very similar to Evedalion's, honestly. It takes away the nuance of like, if you just solely constrict yourself to, oh, this is how a person who's chaotic good behaves or something. But what I wanted to kind of interject with what you were saying is that it's not necessarily that alignment is an indication of what your players will do. It's more of an indication of their morality, or that's what I believe what it's supposed to indicate. For example, someone who is lawful is obviously going to be respectful of the law and authority, versus someone who's chaotic, who is going to be either more self-interested or someone who may be actively rebellious. But overall, yeah, I tend to agree that alignment is one of those things that can be great for people who are getting into the game or getting into creating characters, just to give them an idea of like a set of morality. But once you actually get past that stage and get into creating more nuanced characters that you believe are more dynamic, it's better to just do away with that, because it can be a little bit limiting, especially if you have DMs that are going to be really like enforcing of that those ideals.
Yeah, if you're dealing with a DM who's going to enforce alignment, that's an instance where I'd say, yeah, get rid of it. Like,
Well,
fuck it.
could also be depending on what system that's used, because Pathfinder has alignment spells, where if a creature of a certain alignment, they can take extra damage. you can detect people of different alignments and whatnot. And I think 5e has something like too. Repellent sense evil or something. You can sense evil creatures.
Yep. Yeah. Every version of D&D, as far as I know, has some way, shape, or form of your alignment mattering in terms of either a buff, debuff, or skill. The classic alignment, the whole purpose of it was strictly for spellcasting. It was it was a way of determining whether or not you could cast a spell or not. Like, could you cast detect good versus evil, or detect or protection from evil? Like, bless is another one. And that's because, classic Dungeons and Dragons, a lot of its mentality was you're good and you're going against evil. So you have to have a contrast of what can an evil character spell cast versus what a good character can spell cast.
Actually, the original Dungeons and Dragons was actually law versus chaos. Evil and good is actually much more recently added. I believe it was second edition, technically, that started it.
Technically, that's
Okay,
not
I stand
recent.
corrected.
That's still not recent though. Second.
Yeah, I would say it's not really recent.
Well, if you count the fact that we have old D&D and then we have advanced D&D, which is where we started the new 1 through 5. That's why I said recent. But yeah, I guess it wouldn't really be recent in year terms. Yeah. Booty.
But yeah, so like I'm looking at it like from a world building standpoint. I perfectly like alignment. I'm not as strict with it as like most people are. I let people fluctuate wherever they want to. If I see a character is consistently going down an evil path, I kind of indicate it to the player. I don't say kind of. I do. I indicate it to the player very clearly. With just various characters interacting with them. And it's not like in your case, Eve, where everyone just suddenly hates the character. It's characters asking the player, like, so what'd you do with this situation? And if they're lying to the player or to the NPC, okay, the NPC is going to just buy the lie because they have no reason to doubt the player. But if at some point that NPC finds out the player was lying to them, that can be problematic for the player, because now he's going to have rumors being spread that he is a liar. If he's telling the truth and he did something horrible, the NPC might react as like, oh, that sounds grim. How do you feel? Because, when you do an evil act, you might feel guilt. You might not. But regardless, someone might ask you like, hey, normally people find that to be a bad thing. How do you feel now that you did it? And the character might say, I feel a little relieved. I feel calm. I feel great. Benefactor's character, Timaeus, several calls that he made, people would ask him, like, how do you feel? And he's like, I did not lose a night of sleep. Like, perfectly justified in everything I did. I'm not regretting it. I don't feel sorry. It was good. Everything is happy.
Well, from a world building perspective, I definitely agree with that. And for me personally, I just do it more on a law of the land, because morality is dictated by the masses. It's just how it is.
Yeah.
So
Agreed.
when you're doing world building, you have to think like, what is the moral compass of the world that you're trying to build? And then there's going to be small fractions in between there that try to have their own morale view on it, and that creates conflict. It will always be like that no matter what world you create. As long as you have multiple sentient creatures, there will always be some kind of morale conflict. And that you could just go on it from there. But as Crusader said, you as a DM has full control to set the rules of what alignment means for you and your campaign and your players.
Yeah. And as I've said before, it's like I encourage DMs to be open about it. I think being strict on alignment is stupid. It's again, I come at things from a story writer's perspective. And if you're having any sort of concrete or restrictive rules on almost anything, I would say you're strangling creativity. Now, does that mean you want to have in your Dungeons and Dragons campaign Ewoks flying around with lightsabers? No. You do have some boundaries that you have to put your foot down on. But when it comes to like world building, this is a dynamic you should be thinking about. It's like, okay, what are there gods involved? I know a common theme. I've seen several campaigns advertising no gods. They're like, this campaign has no gods. The gods are gone. They went away, or whatever the reason is that the gods don't exist anymore. I know it's a common theme. A lot of people like that theme, and that's fine. It's like if that's that I think is a campaign where you could just say, yeah, alignment doesn't matter. People are acting as people, and as the theme we're talking about is what works for the world that you're building. Do you want gods? Do you want morality? You could create a society where or a world where morality isn't a thing. No one thinks about morality. It's a matter of just people being completely chaotic, and no one has defined what morality is. That's a fun trick to if you guys have never done that in a game, that's a fun thing to explore, is either a society or a town where they don't use definitions that we use. It's like we don't have a way of articulating what morality is. So when the players try to bring up that subject, they don't know what to do. They're like, wait a minute, hold up. How do I articulate this to someone who doesn't know what this is? It's like describing a nation to someone who doesn't know what a country is. It's like, oh, we're from this country. What's a country?
No, that's people can't, pretty much explain what a country is, or explain a nation, and break it down into the real component for people to understand. You can say literally to somebody, it is community over say 1,000 people, it could be less, but just example, like where 1,000 people we have come together, band together to keep each other alive. Simple, straight, easy. But that's a whole jam of jams there. Well, one last thing I wanted to ask before we went on to the alignment part, which is great. I like to listen to the discussion there. I was actually pretty interesting. The last thing I want to ask everyone is, it is something I think Lady Potato will take a deep interest in when she's ready to run her game, is addressing the difference in player builds in ways that players play. Example, power gamers versus min-maxers, and then there's combat-oriented players versus pure role players, things of that nature. How do you address in your game those differences?
I would say first and foremost is that what you have to sort of tailor your games to what your players' talents are going to be. If you're going to have a player who really enjoys combat in very difficult situations, you're going to have to try your best to accommodate those situations to give the player what they need. We all know it's a group game, so that might be at the expense of someone else's time, which the way to combat that is to give everybody different moments in the light to sort of shine. Give everybody the opportunity to do what they want to do, whether that differs from their party or not. I would say another solution to this would be also not to be so afraid of splitting the party. I know that's kind of a big debacle debate. Some people are like, never split the party, and others are all about it. But I mean, if we're trying to really accomplish a game that is going to satisfy multiple needs, if you have a party that's very differing in their play styles, that is a great tool you can use to sort of send everybody off on their own thing, or you have two people go and handle a dungeon, that sort of thing.
My question to you though, sorry, to this thing. This is going back to the first thing you said, where you said you'll make a encounter that is tailored to the combat oriented play. What do you do when you have an encounter, a combat encounter, where one player is completely more optimized than the rest, that you design the encounter for him? It ends up causing the other players to falter, or vice versa if you design it for the other weaker players, that one player that has optimized himself now is bored and just clears your encounter in a snap of his finger. That is the all right. Well, what you said is very true. That's kind of I guess a more detailed thing I'm asking about. How will you address in terms of builds? Now, this also goes into pure RPs because it can be the same way, because there's a thing of skill monkeys with someone designed where they can literally just do skill checks like this and have no issue with others. Let's say the Constitution wizard. And don't really have high intellect and their skills and not really well defined out and done well. They kind of have nothing they shine at in that regard. How do you deal with making things where one person is optimized versus those that aren't? Doesn't just kind of flood it, or you make it where they're bored. Like, how do you find that good middle ground?
I would say finding that good middle ground is just knowing what your players want to do in character. The Constitution wizard that may not particularly have any sort of talents. Okay, well, what do you want to do with this character? And usually they give you an appropriate answer. And if they don't, I mean, it can be very challenging to navigate that, because we've talked about players that either do nothing, or the players that aren't responsive to the things that you prompt them with or the items you give them to sort of combat that. But yeah, honestly, I would say I don't know. The only way I would combat this would be just to try different things and see what works. And I know that isn't a perfect answer, but I would be curious to know how either Eve or Crusader would handle this question.
I'll let Eve go.
Me again. No, I was just joking. Well, it depends on, I guess, the mix of players. But for your example, with the power gamer and the less optimized players, I would have, for an encounter, have an enemy for both types of players. So you would have one enemy that is strong, that can deal a decent amount of damage, while you have a lot of smaller, weaker enemies, right? And then you would balance the biggest enemy to the smallest players as a group, but allowing it to survive some of the bigger damage from the more optimized player. Because no matter how optimized the player is, there are ways to get around the damage they could potentially build, if you know how they're building. I'm not saying they completely make their kit useless, but make it so that they have to try harder in order to do that, while still having the weaker monsters for the not so optimized players they can deal with. Now, if the optimized player decides to go after the smaller stuff, it still ends up being the group still having to deal with the bigger monster, that it's still balanced toward the big guy, meaning the smaller people still have effective damage against the big guy. So they don't feel like, oh my god, this is just, I can't damage it because it's immune to this and immune to that, and all that kind of stuff. Try to, like what Lady Potato said, tailor it so that each person has something that they're willing to do. Now, you can't accommodate for all types of players, so because there are players who take more of a backseat role when it comes to combat in general, so you can't really accommodate for those type of players, but you can try your best to make an encounter that is engaging, I feel is the correct word, for everyone. And if that doesn't work inherently, you can make side content like challenges that don't really offer like any like experience rewards, but can require awards for the party or benefits for the party if the optimizer completes it. And I got this idea from Final Fantasy 14. There's a particular place where everyone is working together to fight different events called fates. But there's one fate that only one person can do. And if that person completes it, everyone in the zone gets benefits from it. So I got that idea of of that from that. So it's like if the min max or the power player, the optimized player is just destroying so much, you could create tailored experiences for them, short, fair mind you, not too long, so other players are not sitting behind you just watching them do all the stuff, but something that will allow them to flex their abilities while not feeling like they can't do anything when they're with the rest of the party, while still benefiting the party at the same time.
All right. My answer is nowhere near as convoluted. Probably a difference in just our play style and methodologies. As I've said before, I don't come up with tactics for my players. I send the encounter at the players, and that's it. That's it. Just I set the encounter based on what I believe the party can do. I do make my encounters progressively harder. And if the players live, they live. If they die, they die. That's it. You know, I had the one instant with Eve and Benefactor where I offered them, this is a 5-man encounter. Do you want me to scale it down to a 3-man because you guys are 3 people? And they said, no, we want the 5-man. So I've learned it's like, okay, the players, a 5-man encounter can be 3-man if the players are determined enough. And if one player is a power gamer, a min-maxer, and no one else
those
is,
are 2 separate things, just to let you know. Like,
yeah.
I mean,
yeah. If they're either of those things, okay, and they're going to be at my table and they're going to be playing and doing their thing, I am not changing the encounter. As a Benefactor, when we were playing, was it last year? Was it last year we played D&D in live? I redid one of the fights. I had 3 boss fights planned for you guys. You decided that even though you knew the fight, you're like, I'm not going to ruin it. I'm not going to ruin it for anyone else. And you're only going to do what you're told. And you could have told them what to do. You could have helped everyone win the fight. You didn't. And everyone wiped. Like, didn't succeed. Everyone died. And that's fine. It's perfectly fine. You know, to me, it's like if the players figure it out, they figure it out. If they don't, they don't. You know, I'm not one for coddling them. And I'm not one for, you know, if one player is awesome and a badass, my solution to the other players is get good. Like, get on his level, or at least get to a point where you're competent, because the bad guys are getting stronger and better, and you're still staggering over here with a +1 to attack, and you haven't done anything to give yourself more than that. Like, you're just waiting for a magic item to drop out of the sky, or you're waiting for a magic level up to make you suddenly this powerful dude who's buffing himself with spells. He's pulling out his sword. He's taking the sword to a blacksmith, asking the blacksmith for how can he improve the sword. Like, you're just, I'm going to go to the tavern and have a drink. Well, what did you think was going to happen?
I had a question for you, specifically the Benefactor here. Given that you are our resident power gamer,
whoa,
what?
insult, min-maxer, difference, min-maxer.
Okay, a resident min-maxer. You are someone who often excels quite more than the rest of our party in our art games when we've had you. When Eve was talking about benefits and such, for what do you think is an appropriate way to reward players from the player experience for, you know, having such finesse in combat as opposed to your other players? Do you believe that there should be extra rewards in it for you, or that you could, or should it be more of like a party thing? I'm just curious what your thoughts on that are.
I say both. I want the player to feel good if they have the character and it can do what they want the character to do. You know what I'm saying? If they want the character to be able to do this and they can do that, and it helps them excel at what they would do, like in say combat, and they're happy, then I am glad. And like I said before, I design encounters where it's a team operation. You can't really be a one-man army. You can kill things, but you will eventually hit that wall without sufficient help. And the person, generally how I do it is that they don't really have to min max, but you have to know what you can do with what you have. And meaning something you have on you would be helpful. So and then I also want it where when that one person does go through and say chop off the heads of the weak enemies, that the party is elated, because that's like, well, that saves us pain, suffering, or having to wait to deal with this for all this time. This lets us quickly move on. So it's me right now. I feel personally trying to find that balance. I
Oh.
also tend to try
What
to.
I
Oh,
have
go ahead.
a question. Sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah,
in one of your campaigns, basically, I was that with my character, and she was very efficient at defeating and dealing with multiple enemies, to the point where the players was like complaining outside the game, like, when am I going to get power-ups and items and whatnot? Keep in mind, I only had one. Everything else was starting equipment. Everything else was starting equipment. So how do you think about doing that, like balancing that with your knowledge now? Because it was very different then.
Well, one, definitely sit and talk to the players. Again, this goes into asking, what is it that you want? Do you want to do? But even before you joined, I had a player I had to sit down with that. We're just like, okay, what do you want? Do you want to deal damage? It looked like you want to be a damage dealer, but what you told me and how wanted to go forward is completely different. If you want to deal damage, then I can facilitate that. And then sometimes it's just, players, they will tell you, no, I want to do the real thing, and then don't really fulfill that. Again, for me, it's always talking about players and trying to give everybody their stuff. In that situation, I gave everyone relative power increase. And from there, it was, well, hope you use it. If you're still complaining, I'm going to have to embarrass you, and saying like, well, you have this, you have that. You can also do that. Where one player eventually showed he could do even more than your character can. It was like, yeah, you just have to use the tools given to you. At this point, for me, if the other players complain that one character feels too stronger than them, and like, well, I can give you the tool, but is that what you want for your character? Is that what your character is about? Is your character about chopping heads and kicking balls and everything? Is that what you want for your character? That's what that person wants for their character. That's what they were given. So it's also in that regard. It's like if they also want to do that, then I will facilitate that. My whole thing is I will facilitate to the best of my abilities. But as I've learned, I'm no longer going to be at the point where I am kind of like begging you to do the things you ask me to do for you and giving you the things and you're not using it. So it's what you asked was a really hard question for me, because it's like I have kind of fixed the solution and then still ran into the same problem continuing in that same campaign. So
I was more or less trying to get your insight on what your I guess your player insight on that issue as well, not just your DM insight.
my player insight on that issue, whew. I well, this is going into a topic that I don't want to go too far into. Spoiler, it's kind of a topic we're going to go into next week, which is character concepts. This is more of us as players, more than DMs talking. But my min maxing, which is a very separate thing. Why I say power gaming is a very rude thing to say. Someone that's more of a min maxer, and generally min maxers have a concept and they try to match their talents to said concept. You know what I'm saying? So for me as a player, I don't think too hard on it as best as possible. I try to leave that up to the DM, because there's plenty of times in Crusader Jackaran's game where I was really bored with a lot of the combat that weren't quote boss fights. The mooks were really, really boring. But I also understood, this is you guys' time in a sense to also get your bearings with what you guys can do. And if it got bad, I can just go, all right, I can turn into Merc mode and just run in, which is why I always try to make myself as a player versatile, never too leaning towards one way, so that if we ever had a shortcoming, I'm a team player. I don't think people don't think that of me. I'm not gonna say it's
You're
that
an evil team player, but yes, you are a paradox.
You aren't a team player, more or less, is that you are definitely a team leader. Whether you try to be or not, you still end up doing it. It's just your dominating presence.
Yeah, I
That
know.
actually brings up a follow up to what Lady Potato just said. Have any of you been in a position where you've overperformed so well that you've become the de facto leader of the group? Like the group will come to you to solve all the problems because you perform so well?
Yes. Yes. I would say in the what's it called, the
DC
Cypher game,
Vertigo?
the DC game. Yes, I definitely was that person, and you were that person in the fair game, Benefactor.
Lord, I know. Nothing like just trying to do something and people break down the door. Tobias! Tobias! Like, what? Go! Okay, there, done. 2 seconds later, Tobias! Like, what? Why? Why are you all bothering me for these simplest things that you guys yourselves can do and have the skills for?
Oh, cool plot thing that I could do by myself. Blair, come do this with us. We know you've got 7,000 things to do, but come do this with us. Yes, I'm. Anyways, continue, Eve.
Yeah, I had that with one of my characters as well. I made basically a slave boy who backstory was he got his powers by accident and he just didn't have any real way to control it, and he's been a slave all his life. So he just got rescued and he's now experiencing the galaxy the first time. Like he's on a transport ship going to the main hub and he's like oohing and eyeing, and he gets thrusted into this whole environment and situation that happens, and he joins in because that's just the type of person he is. And eventually he meets the party, and we get to a point where we need to register a captains for the ship, and they register my character doesn't know anything about the galaxy. My character doesn't actually fully know how to control his power, and he's been a slave all his life. All he can remember is just working the mines, and he's been voted by the group unanimously because of how well I was just performing in combat, because of how much basic damage the character could deal, just like raw. And I'm like, bro, why are you having me the leader? So I'm like roleplay wise, I wouldn't be able to solve problems. Like I was like, well, I've never been here. I don't understand how this works. I don't know what a computer console is. Captain of a spaceship.
Yeah. Finding groups is hard. Finding the best, most ideal group is hard. Finding players that all have the same play style is nigh impossible.
Well, that's something. It's funny to say that because I've been in a game where everyone ignored the party leader, much to my party leader's upset. I was the only character who was willing to work with him, and everyone else, like we had the dwarf and the he wasn't a dragonborn. He was some sort of lizard, some sort of reptile. He was of the mentality. Both of them were of the mentality. We want to just kill stuff. So every second we're spending not killing stuff, we're not happy. And then we had the thieves. We had one thief, one rogue who was like, I want to do rogue stuff, but I don't know how to do rogue stuff because I'm new to the game. And then we had the other rogue who's like, I know how to be a rogue. And you guys know that this player. I'm the rogue. I'm going to stand in the corner and be very dark and rogue-like. And don't anyone ask me any questions about anything. And then we had who was the other guy? That might have been our party. But yeah, we had the leader who was, I am the charismatic leader, but I'm a shady ass paladin. So I'm a good paladin, but shady. And so the shady paladin was the leader. He was of the mindset, okay, everyone's going to follow me because I'm just so smart at everything that my choice and my decision making is logical. So everyone's going to go with me because logic. Never mind the dwarf who wants to kill people and the lizard boy who wants to kill people. So there was a conflict of interest there. My character was the wizard, so my guy is naturally inclined towards I need a party because me by myself is going to die. You know, I need some beefcakes to protect me and insulate me. But my point in bringing that up is that's an incident where it was the opposite of what you guys are saying, where everyone would go to the leader. This is an instance where everyone would just fuck off. They would just completely ignore the leader. They would do their own thing, and the leader would get frustrated. He would start falling asleep at the table because he was so upset that no one was doing anything that he wanted them to do, and everyone was just acting out and doing their own thing. And
Question about the leader: was this leader designated as a leader by the group, or he was a self-imposed leader?
self-imposed leader,
And that's why.
but out of game, everyone mutually accepted him as leader. Like, okay, we all know he's going to play the leader character. And the mistake on his part was he's of the mindset all circumstances and events are going to come to me. And when they come to me, I will then allocate who is going to do what. And that's not how D&D is played. That's not how you play D&D. Everyone has their own circumstances and their own experiences. And that's what this guy failed to understand. And so he was having a terrible experience. He was not having fun at the game because he felt like everyone was disrespecting him. Everyone was actively trying to screw him over. And I tried to tell him before we got into the game, I tried telling him, like, you're putting these expectations on players and these people, and you haven't spoken to any of them about their character and their relationship to you. You haven't done anything to earn anyone at the table's respect. You haven't done any of these things. So you have to actually do that. And his response to me was, oh, I know what I have to do. Okay. You know, you reap what you sow. And, you know, I'd say, I'll chime in again. I'll say, contrast that to, I mean, I would say it's probably the same thing in Scion now that I'm thinking about it. My character, Gustav, he imposed himself as leader. He was like, I'm taking charge of this thing because if I don't, it's going to be a clusterfuck. And everyone seemed to kind of reluctantly accept that, like, well, fine. But even then, no one listened to him. No one listened to him until it actually mattered. Then they were like, hey, this guy actually knows what the hell he's talking about. But
Actually, a character that I played in Sign as well, Gisela, I feel like was basically pseudo leader because everyone was afraid that she'd kill them. And I'm like, I was straight confused by that because I'm like, the way I played the character, she did nothing but help every single person. Now, granted, I brutally murdered our enemies. Decapitation, split in half. I mean, the works. Drenched in blood, all that. But none of that was toward the players. And they was like, well, let's not argue with Gisela because she gonna kill us.
You think you got it bad? Bruh, I was their captain, their leader, their friend in Fair End Time. We got put into the past. I was turned human, they was turned halflings, and for some reason, for some godforsaken reason, every time I would appear before them, they ran from me. They ran like I was going to murder every single one of them. And then it's not like they didn't know it was me. I announced it was me. They understood it was me. And every single time they ran from me. Like I was literally going to kill them. Like I just was in like, now is my chance to murder them. Yes. So yeah. Got quiet from that one, huh?
Well, yeah, I know. I've seen you go to the point of Potato. You are scratching and exploding, like you aren't talking at all.
Yeah, it's my mic. It's having issues. Okay, we're clear
Yeah,
now?
there you go. There you go.
Yeah. Sorry, I kind of wanted to loop back to the Scion campaign a little bit. I want to say that whole dynamic with the group was a little bit weird, though, just by how everyone was introduced, and there was a lot of secrecy and a lot of mistrust in the group in general. So that dynamic probably also played into how we felt about Eve's character as well. But yeah, that whole incident that happened with Tamias's character, I don't really have words for that one. That one was that was beyond me. I know that when you and I in character kind of corresponded, but I still can't explain why the rest of the party did that. Maybe to keep cover, but still, it was weird.
I don't think you understand, Eve, when I say they ran, they made it a loud point intentions. Like, oh my god, it's Tomias! Run! And just dipped from me. And I had to run and chase them. And they really were just running
You
from
say
me.
I don't understand, but keep in mind, I was there when you called me after it happened. Like, so I've heard it in various different forms. So I may not have been able to experience it, but I could pretty much make a mental image of the events that happened.
Well, this has been a rather great session. I would like to have one more story time, which was one of the prime reasons we really wanted Eve here too. Well, not say we didn't want to have a discussion. Crusader Jackaran actually wanted to talk about one of his boss encounters that the two of us, sadly, we don't have the third person here. Unfortunately, he was unable to make it.
You mean the ones that he mentioned before, where he asked us to scale down the encounter, and we said no.
Yeah, the Psycho Council.
Yeah, something he wanted to talk to us about. Again, I'm sad the third person wasn't here. It'd been real lovely to have him, but I still think it's a good thing to bring up. Mr. Crusader?
Oh, I thought you were gonna ask something about it. Because I'm willing to save it. I'm willing to table it for another discussion.
All right. I guess we'll do that then. Maybe when we get the third person, hopefully we can get Eve again. Because then I feel like with our luck, Eve's not being able to make it when we get the other person.
It's all right. It's perfectly fine. We'll get him on again.
I feel like we should save that particular story for when we're actually talking about the nitty-gritty details of designing and creating boss encounters. I know we kind of did the homebrew thing last week, but we didn't get into the details and the nuances of designing specific boss encounters.
Well, I wanted this to be more of an end of thing, fun story time kind of thing, like real, like funny story. But we'll leave it with you guys running away from me. We'll just leave it with that story. You people know who you are. I know some of you are watching.
All right. Elle, is there anything else we want to talk about? Anything we missed on your bullet points here, Benefactor?
I gotta call them bullet points. More like things I thought everybody would enjoy of the topic of discussion. I'm here to grant your wish, and your wish is to talk. So I've done so. No, that is everything that I have come for.
All right. Anything you want to talk about, Lady Potato?
I feel like for now we've had a pretty long discussion so far, and we've kind of beat some dead horses. But it was a really great discussion, and hearing you guys talk about some of the ways that you build, and having Eve here today. I haven't really had a lot of chances. I haven't been a player in your game yet, and I haven't heard much of your style. So it was really a treat to hear some of the things you had to say. And there were some things that you guys were talking about that gave me new ideas as well. So thank
Awesome.
you all very, very much. And that's probably a wrap unless anyone else has something to say.
I'm going to go to Eve. Is there anything you want to talk about, Eve?
Not in particular. I'm just grateful to be here, and thank you guys for having me on your podcast.
Thank you. And all right. Does anyone want to plug their wares where people can find you? Benefactor. I know you have your Twitch.
Yeah, you all know where to find me, both on YouTube and Twitch at ChaosRyzen. Please come and subscribe.
All right. Eve, is there any place people can track you down if they are interested?
They can find me in Oblivion. No, I don't have any socials or any way to contact me.
All right. So if you want Eve back on, feel free to leave it in the comments section. And we're definitely going to have him back. If I have anything to say about it, we'll have him back because love this man. He's great.
Thanks.
But all right. Thank you for listening. And thank you, everyone, for being here. You guys have a great weekend. And Happy New Year.
Ta-ta.